The galaxy had always been a place of constant motion, and endless noise planets spun in their orbit. Stars burned bright against the vast black canvas of space, and civilizations thrived with their endless transmissions that filled the galaxy like a hum in the background. The universe seemed alive in its own chaotic harmony. But then one day the hum from Earth vanished without warning, without explanation. The lights of Earth faded from the galactic networks, and everything that once marked its existence disappeared like a stone sinking into a bottomless abyss. For days there was nothing, no calls, no signals, no signs of life. It was as if the planet had simply ceased to be. The silence spread throughout the stars, and the first stirrings of fear began to ripple through the galaxy. The Council of the greatest galactic civilizations convened immediately an emergency summit to discuss the unknown event that had taken place. The leaders of the largest and most powerful species exchanged worried glances, trying to comprehend the meaning of Earth's sudden and complete disappearance. Their best minds could not offer a solution. Not even the most brilliant scientists could explain how an entire planet could vanish without a trace. The galaxy's most advanced detection systems showed nothing, not even a distant echo of a massive explosion, not a flicker of energy that might indicate conflict, no remnants of any kind. Nothing was left behind. The silence persisted day after day, and the unease turned to panic. Those who relied on Earth's transmissions for trade or communication found themselves cut off from the rest of the galaxy. They couldn't reach their allies, their homes, or even their sources of information. They had no way to understand what had happened. The idea that Earth was destroyed seemed impossible, but it was the only explanation that began to make sense. For many, the most terrifying possibility was that Earth had been erased, not just destroyed, but wiped from the very fabric of the universe, erased from existence, as though it had never been there to begin with. The news spread to every corner of the galaxy that Earth was gone, but no one knew why, no one knew how. The question lingered in the minds of all who heard the reports. What force was powerful enough to wipe a planet from the stars? What force could eliminate an entire civilization without a trace? Could it be an enemy, a threat more terrifying than any the galaxy had ever faced? Or was it something more cosmic, something far beyond the understanding of even the most advanced species in the galaxy? As the fear began to spread, some sought solace in the idea that it was a natural disaster, a cataclysmic event that had wiped Earth from the stars. But those who held power in the Galactic Council were not so easily comforted. They understood the significance of the silence. They could not dismiss it as mere chance. The galaxy had known conflict, but this was different. This was something more profound, something that could change the very course of history. The silence of Earth was a warning, but a warning of what they did not know yet. No one knew the true extent of the danger lurking in the dark corners of the galaxy, but they would soon learn that the absence of Earth was only the beginning. The first wave of search vessels arrived at Earth's last known location, a fleet of explorers and scientists dispatched to investigate what had happened. The ships cut through the void of space, like birds of prey searching for a missing trail, but when they arrived they found nothing at all. No remnants of Earth, no scattered debris, no faint traces of its existence. The space where the planet once stood was empty. The coordinates were wiped clean from the star maps. Not even the dust of its passing remained. The crew of the lead vessel gathered in silence, staring at their instruments, their faces pale in the cold light of their control rooms. The data was clear. Earth was gone, and there was no reason why their systems failed to detect any signs of destruction. No catastrophic explosion, no remnants of a battle, nothing to suggest that the planet had been destroyed in any way. It was as if the planet had been plucked from existence. Without a sound, the fleet leader gave the order to begin a deeper search. They sent probes to scan the surrounding areas for any unusual energy readings or signs of disturbance, but the results came back the same: empty silence. There were no traces of any force or event that could explain the disappearance, not a ripple in the fabric of space, nothing out of the ordinary in the surrounding systems. The absence of Earth was absolute, and the fear began to grow. It was one thing to lose a planet to a natural disaster or some kind of accident, But to have an entire world simply vanish without a trace was something else entirely, something that could not be ignored. It wasn't just the loss of Earth that worried the fleet commander, it was the implications of such an event. If something had the power to remove an entire planet without a trace, what else could it do? What other threats might be lurking in the dark corners of the galaxy, waiting to strike? The fleet pressed on in their investigation, searching for answers, but the silence continued to stretch out before them. Like a vast and terrifying abyss, they scoured nearby star systems, hoping to find something, anything that might point to a cause. But all they found was emptiness. Time and again their instruments came back silent. Their scans revealed no signs of life, no abnormal energy spikes, nothing to indicate any kind of event that could explain the phenomenon. The lead vessel's crew grew more and more unsettled with each passing day. They had nothing concrete to go on, no leads, no answers. All they had was a growing sense of dread that something was horribly wrong at the edge of their search zone. A faint signal was detected. It was weak, distant, but it was something. The fleet immediately redirected their course to investigate the signal. As they approached, they began to make out the shape of a small craft drifting in the dark. It was human, it had to be. There were unmistakable signs of Earth's technology marking its exterior. The ship was a ghost, a remnant from Earth's last days. But it was alive. The vessel was intact and seemingly abandoned. The crew gathered around the ship's airlock, but they couldn't prepare themselves for what they would find inside. When the hatch finally opened, they found a crew that had been lost for weeks, cut off from the galaxy, adrift in deep space. And they spoke of a terrible truth, a force that had awakened, something ancient and hungry, something that had consumed Earth and would soon come for them all. The survivors said only one thing before they collapsed from exhaustion and fear. Humanity had always known of the threat, but no one had ever believed it would come to this. No one had ever believed the galaxy could truly tremble in fear from something far older than any of them. The small vessel carrying the survivors from Earth docked with the lead exploration ship, and the air was thick with tension. The survivors were disoriented, their eyes hollow from weeks of isolation, their bodies weak and frail from the uncertainty of deep space. They were human, and yet they seemed like ghosts, as if the horrors they had witnessed had left an indelible mark on their souls. The fleet commander greeted them with solemnity, knowing that whatever these survivors carried with them would change everything. As they were escorted to the medical bay, one of the survivors, a man named Captain Elias, finally found the strength to speak. His voice was hoarse, but the words he spoke would echo across the galaxy, for they were a warning that no one could have anticipated. "We were not the first," Captain Elias began, his eyes distant, haunted by memories too terrible to fully grasp. "There is something older than us, something that's been waiting in the dark." The room grew deathly quiet as every eye turned to the man. He continued, his voice trembling, but his words unwavering. "It started long before Earth's disappearance. We studied it, prepared for it, but we never believed it would come to this. We thought it was just a myth, a warning passed down through the ages. We were wrong." He paused, as though summoning the strength to speak of what had occurred. "There is a force out there, something ancient, something that feeds on stars, on life, on entire worlds. It's a predator, a creature older than any civilization in the galaxy, and Earth was its next meal." The room was still, the weight of his words settling on everyone like a suffocating blanket. Elias's eyes flickered with an emotion that could not be defined. Fear, yes, but something more. A deep understanding of just how powerless they had all been in the face of this cosmic predator. "Is it still out there?" one of the officers asked, her voice barely a whisper, though her heart raced with the possibilities. "Yes," Elias replied, his voice filled with finality. "It's already moving through the galaxy, consuming everything in its path. We only saw a small part of it, the beginning of its hunger." Earth wasn't destroyed in any normal way. The planet was erased, consumed, wiped from the stars, as if it had never existed. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room, but the commander held up a hand to silence them. The realization was sinking in. Earth had not simply been destroyed by an explosion or some catastrophic event. It had been erased, consumed by something unimaginable. Elias continued, his voice low and steady. We've called it the Devourer. That's what we named it during our studies, because it does just that. It devours everything. There's no escape, no place to hide. It doesn't leave behind remnants or signs. Once it's finished, all that remains is an empty void. The officers exchanged glances, their minds struggling to understand the scale of the horror they were now faced with. How do we fight it? One of them asked, desperate for some sort of hope, some plan of action. Elias shook his head slowly. You can't fight it, not in the traditional sense. It's not a creature that can be defeated with weapons or firepower. It's beyond that, something that bends the very fabric of reality. The only thing we know is that it will move through every system, consuming everything in its wake, until nothing is left. The room fell silent again, but this time it was not just fear that gripped them. It was resolve. The galaxy's fate was in their hands, and if the Devourer was coming for them, they would not go quietly into the night. Humanity, though shaken and broken, had faced extinction before. They would face it again. But this time, they would fight, not with brute force, but with something far more dangerous, their unyielding spirit. The survivors from Earth had delivered their message, and now the galaxy had a choice: to stand together and resist the impossible, or to fall prey to the darkness that was sweeping across the stars. The silent void was growing louder, and the clock was ticking. The shockwave of fear that followed the revelation of the Devourer spread faster than the galaxy's fastest ships. As the survivors' warning echoed across the stars, an uneasy silence fell over the council chambers. The great galactic leaders, so accustomed to peace and order, now faced an enemy they could not understand. And worse, one they had no means of confronting. Humanity's once unremarkable planet had just exposed a vulnerability in the galaxy that no one had anticipated. An ancient ravenous force that transcended the boundaries of what any civilization had ever faced. The Council immediately began preparing for a conflict unlike any before, but it quickly became clear that there was no preparation sufficient for what was coming. Within weeks, the first signs of the Devourer's approach were unmistakable. The galaxy's most advanced surveillance systems, designed to detect the slightest anomaly in space, picked up a series of unusual energy fluctuations, waves of destruction that seemed to ripple through the very fabric of space itself. It wasn't just the destruction of planets that they feared. It was the way in which the Devourer moved. Its ships were not like anything the galaxy had ever seen. Massive, formless, and shadowed in the depths of space. They seemed to materialize from nothing, existing in the space between stars as if they were part of the darkness itself. Wherever these ships went, the stars dimmed, and the silence grew. Worlds began to disappear. The galaxy's mightiest fleets, once proud and unchallenged, could do nothing against the sheer scale of the threat. Planet after planet fell. Systems swallowed whole without so much as a battle cry. Whole populations vanished overnight, their homes reduced to nothing but the quiet hum of space. Governments scrambled to maintain order, but there was no strategy, no defense against a force that devoured entire star systems without effort. The Devourer was not an enemy that could be countered with military might. It was a plague of the stars. It wasn't just the threat of death that gripped the galaxy's leaders. It was the realization that they were powerless to stop it. But amidst the despair, something unexpected happened. Humanity, once a small and fragile species on the fringes of the galaxy, began to show the first signs of resistance. A scattered network of human survivors, led by the same crew members who had delivered the warning, began to organize. They had no vast fleets at their disposal, no advanced weaponry like the other galactic races, but they had something far more valuable, a determination that none of the other species could match. Captain Elias and his team, now seen as both prophets and warriors, gathered what human forces they could from scattered colonies, piecing together old ships, salvaged equipment, and the knowledge they had learned from studying the Devourer. There was no grand strategy, no miracle weapon, just the knowledge that humanity had survived worse, and that they could fight back. The first human-led resistance attack came in the form of a small, makeshift fleet, far outnumbered by the oncoming tide of devourer ships. They struck quickly and silently, exploiting the smallest weakness in the invaders' tactics. It wasn't about winning. It was about sending a message. The devourer had come to consume everything in its path, but it hadn't anticipated the resolve of humanity to not go quietly into the dark. The galaxy watched as the small fleet clashed with the vast darkness. Against all odds, a handful of human ships scored a minor victory, disabling one of the devourer's ships and proving that it could be done. The message was clear. Humanity would not surrender. They would fight. And though it seemed a futile effort at first, it was enough to spark something more. Across the galaxy, the first seeds of resistance began to take root. No longer would the galaxy sit idle. The fight had just begun, and humanity would lead the charge, armed with nothing more than their will to survive. In the shadows of the devourer's looming presence, the galaxy found its first flicker of hope, and it came from the most unlikely of sources. The victory, though small, sent a ripple through the galaxy, a spark that could not be ignored. While the devastation caused by the devourer's advance continued, humanity's unexpected resilience became a symbol of defiance. Their determination to fight back, to stand up against the cosmic predator that had consumed Earth, was something the galaxy's other species had never expected. But the question remained, would this spark be enough to rally the rest of the galaxy, or would it be snuffed out just as quickly as it had appeared? Across the galaxy, leaders of the most powerful civilizations watched the human resistance grow. Many had laughed at the idea of humans fighting back, but now there was doubt in their minds. Some began to question if perhaps humanity's spirit, though small in numbers compared to the great galactic empires, held something far more dangerous, a tenacity and adaptability that the devourer had not accounted for. The galaxy's mighty fleets were formidable, yes, but they were designed to fight one another, not to face an enemy like the devourer. The devourer was a force of nature, not a foe to be defeated by conventional tactics. As humanity's resistance began to gather momentum, a clandestine alliance of several races and factions started to form. The realization that they might stand a chance against the devourer, not through sheer power, but through unity and ingenuity, brought them together. Though some species were hesitant, still caught up in their old rivalries and grudges, others saw the potential in working alongside humanity. The resistance, led by Captain Elias and the other survivors of Earth, became a beacon for all those who had lost their homes, their families, and their worlds to the devourer's insatiable hunger. For the first time in galactic history, species that had once been enemies were now allies, bound together by a single cause: survival. The human resistance, now bolstered by a growing coalition, began to organize in ways that even the devourer hadn't anticipated. They scavenged, repurposed, and adapted technology in ways that were unorthodox but effective. Old warships were given new life with makeshift weapons, while other species contributed advanced technology that had been left untouched, locked away for fear of misuse. It wasn't about overwhelming the devourer with firepower, but about outsmarting it, striking where it was weakest, and making every attack count. One such plan, devised by human engineers and tacticians, was a daring attack on one of the devourer's largest fleets. The plan was risky, almost suicidal, but it was humanity's best shot at making a real impact. The resistance would infiltrate the fleet, using cloaking technology and precision strikes to disable key vessels. The mission was fraught with danger, and failure would mean certain death. But for the first time, there was hope. The galaxy's forces, united in a way never seen before, would strike with one purpose, one heart. Captain Elias, now a symbol of human resilience, addressed the new coalition of forces before the mission began. He spoke not just as a leader, but as someone who had lost everything: his home, his family, and the very planet that had birthed him. "This isn't just about revenge," he said, his voice steady but fierce. "This is about showing the Devourer that we are more than just survivors. We are fighters. We may be small, but we are not insignificant. We will not go quietly. We will not be erased." The speech spread through the coalition like wildfire. It wasn't just words. It was a rallying cry, one that gave new purpose to every soldier, every ship, every species that had once cowered under the shadow of the Devourer. Humanity had shown them that there was something worth fighting for. The enemy was overwhelming, yes, but humanity had given them something more powerful than weapons, the will to stand together, to fight not just for survival, but for hope. As the coalition's forces assembled for the mission, the galaxy held its breath. The Devourer may have been an unstoppable force, but for the first time, it faced something it couldn't comprehend: unity, determination, and the burning desire of those who refused to be erased. The time for fear was over. The time to fight had come. The initial assault on the Devourer fleet was a gamble, risky, audacious, and potentially suicidal. But to the coalition, it was a necessary act. Humanity and its allies had managed to infiltrate a key part of the Devourer's armada, striking hard and fast, exploiting weaknesses they'd painstakingly discovered through months of covert intelligence. The mission, which should have been a one-way trip, had turned into an unexpected success. The Devourer fleet had been struck in its heart, a few of its colossal ships disabled, leaving its forces temporarily disoriented. What followed was nothing short of extraordinary. The ripple effect of the attack sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. News of the Resistance's success spread faster than any warship could travel. Across systems, factions, and planets once hesitant to join the struggle now saw the possibility of victory. The galaxy was finally starting to believe, if humanity and its allies could strike a blow against the Devourer, maybe they could win this war after all. The Devourer, once a force of nature that had seemed unstoppable, now appeared vulnerable, and the coalition's resolve strengthened. New alliances formed, old grudges were set aside, and the unity that had once seemed like an impossible dream became a reality. Planets with no history of cooperation began to share resources, technology, and expertise, each species contributing something unique to the fight. Some provided weapons, others intelligence, while humanity offered a determination that none of the other species could match. The power of unity was undeniable. What began as a resistance movement had evolved into a full-scale galactic war. Every sector of the galaxy now had a stake in the outcome, and the fight spread across hundreds of star systems. The coalition's forces used hit-and-run tactics, guerrilla warfare, and sabotage to strike the Devourer's fleet, making every attack a lesson in how to resist the predator. It wasn't about overwhelming the invaders with firepower. It was about learning their patterns, exploiting their weaknesses, and forcing them to fight on humanity's terms. The Devourer, with all its power, had underestimated the resolve of those it sought to consume. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the Devourer's forces began to show signs of strain. Though their ships were massive and their technology incomprehensible, they had one crucial flaw: they lacked the adaptability of the coalition's forces. While the Devourer had learned to destroy, it had never been forced to adapt in the same way the coalition had. Humanity's ingenuity and the unity of its allies were proving to be the enemy's greatest challenge. Captain Elias, now at the forefront of the resistance, could see the tide turning. He could feel it in the movements of their fleets, in the quiet victories, in the way morale was steadily rising. The Devourer, so confident in its ability to wipe out civilizations, had underestimated something that would ultimately prove to be its downfall: the strength of species fighting for survival. Elias knew it wasn't just the might of the resistance that was shifting the balance. It was their unity and resilience, their unshakable will to keep going in the face of unimaginable odds. But despite the mounting victories, the coalition's forces knew they were still far from winning. The Devourer had not yet unleashed its full fury. The war was far from over. They had to push harder, strike faster, and dig deeper than ever before to deal a final blow to the cosmic predator. The Coalition was learning, adapting, and growing stronger every day. Humanity's spirit, unbroken, unyielding, had sparked a fire that now spread across the galaxy. It was no longer a question of whether the Devourer could be defeated. The question was how long the galaxy could hold its ground before the Predator came to devour them all. As the battle for the galaxy raged on, one thing was clear. The Devourer had underestimated the power of unity, and that was a mistake it would soon regret. The war had reached a critical juncture. The Coalition's forces, bolstered by humanity's ingenuity and the unity of its allies, had inflicted significant damage to the Devourer's fleets. Systems once thought impervious to attack had been liberated, and the galaxy began to see the light of hope once again. But the Devourer, far from retreating, only seemed to grow more desperate and relentless. It had learned, adapting to the Coalition's tactics, and now it was striking back with terrifying force. The final confrontation was inevitable. Captain Elias stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the swirling expanse of stars that surrounded them. The Resistance fleet had gathered for one last push, a decisive strike to end the war once and for all. The Coalition had prepared for this moment. Their fleets were assembled, their forces united in a single, unbreakable purpose. Earth's legacy, humanity's strength, and the sacrifices of countless species who had joined the fight now hung on the edge of a knife. If they failed now, all would be lost. The Devourer's fleets loomed at the far edge of the system, an imposing wall of darkness and incomprehensible technology. For the first time since the war began, there was a palpable fear in the air, an unspoken realization that victory was not guaranteed, no matter how far they had come. Yet amidst the fear, there was something else, something that could not be ignored. The unity of the Coalition was stronger than it had ever been. The desire to survive, to push back against the insurmountable odds, burned within every soldier, every pilot, every leader. Elias turned to face the crew, his voice steady, resolute. "This is it. This is where we make our stand. The Devourer thinks it can break us, that it can swallow us whole. But they've forgotten one thing. There's more to life than just survival. We fight because we have something worth fighting for. The galaxy is ours, and we will not let it fall into darkness." His words resonated with the crew. The officers and soldiers who had followed him from the beginning, who had faced the unimaginable horrors of the Devourer's destruction, now stood ready for the final battle. There was no turning back. There was no more room for doubt. The enemy had underestimated humanity and its allies for too long. Now they would face the full fury of the Coalition, an alliance forged through fire, tested in blood, and united by an unbreakable will. The battle began with a deafening roar as the Coalition's forces launched their assault. The Devourer's ships, massive and seemingly invincible, moved with terrifying precision, but the Coalition's tactics had evolved beyond anything the Predator had expected. The human ships, nimble and unpredictable, darted through the void, launching devastating strikes at the core of the Devourer's forces. The Allied fleets moved as one, their coordination flawless, their firepower relentless. For hours, the two forces clashed in a violent dance across the stars. The Devourer's ships were formidable, but they were not invincible. As the battle raged on, the Coalition began to wear down the Devourer's defenses, exploiting weaknesses in its armor, targeting its energy cores, and striking at the heart of its fleet. Humanity's resolve had been their greatest weapon, and now it was paying off. But even as the Devourer's forces faltered, it fought back with a fury born of desperation. The Predator unleashed its full might, tearing into the Coalition's ships with unimaginable force. The space around them became a swirling tempest of destruction, each explosion a testament to the sheer stakes of the conflict. Yet the Coalition did not falter. Every ship, every soldier, every pilot fought with everything they had, knowing that this was the final chance to rid the galaxy of the Devourer's scourge. Captain Elias, his hand steady on the controls, watched as the battle reached its apex. The fate of the galaxy rested on this moment. He had lost everything before: his home, his people, his planet. But now, standing with his allies, he realized that they had something far more powerful than the Devourer could ever comprehend. The Devourer could destroy, could consume, but it could never defeat the will of those who refused to be erased. With a final desperate surge, the Coalition launched its ultimate weapon, a massive coordinated strike aimed at the heart of the Devourer's largest ship, the core of its dark empire. The weapon tore through space, slamming into the Devourer's vessel with a force that shook the very stars. The Predator's ship shuddered, its core destabilizing, and with a final cataclysmic explosion, the ship was obliterated. For a moment, there was silence. Then, like a dam breaking, the victory swept through the galaxy. The Devourer's forces faltered, disarray spreading among the remaining ships. The Predator's grip on the galaxy had been broken. The Coalition had won. The war was over. The galaxy had survived. But as the dust settled, and the stars began to burn bright once more, Captain Elias knew one thing above all else. Humanity had not just survived. They had shown the galaxy that even in the face of the greatest darkness, the spirit of those who fight for each other could shine through, no matter the odds. The galaxy was quiet. The battle had ended, and the once imposing shadow of the Devourer had finally dissipated, leaving behind the wreckage of the war, a war that had threatened to erase everything, yet had instead forged something new. The victory over the Devourer had come at a great cost, but it had also united the galaxy in a way that no one had ever thought possible. Species that had once been divided by centuries of conflict now stood side by side, their mutual survival having bred a bond stronger than any treaty or alliance. And at the heart of it all was humanity, the small, unassuming species that had sparked the greatest resistance the galaxy had ever known. Captain Elias stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring out at the remnants of the battle. The stars, once obscured by the dark presence of the Devourer, now shone brightly once again. The darkness had been pushed back, but the scars of the war would remain for a long time. Across the galaxy, planets that had once been lost were now rebuilding, healing from the wounds of the invasion. Some worlds had been destroyed entirely, leaving only ghostly echoes of the civilizations that had once called them home. Yet in the wake of the destruction, something extraordinary had taken root, a renewed sense of purpose. The galaxy, though scared, was alive with possibility. Elias reflected on the cost of victory. The war had claimed countless lives, and though the Devourer was no more, the path to peace would not be easy. The galaxy had seen what destruction could come from indifference, from isolation. It had learned, the hard way, that no species could stand alone against the darkness that lurked beyond the stars. The unity forged in the fires of war had to be preserved if the galaxy was to thrive. Beside him, his fellow leaders, representatives from every corner of the Coalition, watched the stars in silence. They had gathered to discuss the future, to chart a course for the rebuilding of their civilizations. A council had been established, a body made up of all species, not just the largest or the most powerful, but every race that had been part of the resistance. For the first time in history, all voices were being heard equally. The galaxy had learned that survival was not just about defeating enemies, but about embracing the strength found in diversity and cooperation. A human delegate, one of the survivors from Earth's final days, stepped forward to speak. "We didn't win this war with weapons or technology alone," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We won because we came together. Every species, every individual, no matter how small, contributed to this victory. And now we must ensure that we don't lose what we have gained. This galaxy is ours to rebuild. We have a chance to shape the future, to make sure that no force, no matter how ancient or powerful, can ever threaten us again." His words resonated with every leader present. They had all seen the same thing in the war, the strength that came from standing together, the unyielding will to survive. The devastation caused by the Devourer had left them with no choice but to evolve, to change their ways. The future was no longer about dominance or isolation. It was about shared responsibility, shared knowledge, and shared strength. As the council deliberated, Captain Elias knew that this was the true victory. The galaxy had been saved, not by force of arms, but by the simple, undeniable truth that cooperation was the most powerful weapon of all. Humanity had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited the resistance, but the coalition, made up of countless races and cultures, had been the fire that burned away the darkness. And now, as the galaxy began to heal, they all faced a new dawn together. The war was over, but the journey was just beginning. It would take time for the scars of war to fade, for the wounds to heal, but the coalition stood strong. The galaxy had learned its lesson, that even in the darkest of times, when the odds were impossible, there was always hope. And as long as the unity forged in the fires of war remained, no enemy, no matter how vast, no matter how ancient, could ever break them again. Captain Elias watched the stars once more, knowing that humanity and its allies had secured not just their survival, but the future of the entire galaxy. The darkness was gone. The light of a new era had begun.